Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and how it may be able to pass Breath of the Wild in lifetime sales. Not only do I think it's possible now, I think it's actually pretty likely based off the latest news of the game's sales this weekend, which are extremely impressive. But before we go further, let me point out that there will be no major spoilers in this video. It's going to be spoiler free. The only footage we'll be using will be parts from the early part of the game that have been already kind of showed by Nintendo, so do not worry. And let me also remind you that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. So, on to the news. Yesterday morning, Nintendo of America tweeted out, "The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has sold over 10 million copies worldwide in its first 3 days, becoming the fastest selling game in the history of the Legend of Zelda series, thanks to those already enjoying Link's latest adventure." This is just astounding, selling 10 million in 3 days. This puts it up there with one of some of the fastest selling games of all time that are on multiple platforms, and this is just on the Switch. And also by extension, it is the fastest selling game in the Zelda history, which does include Breath of the Wild. But we got a little bit more information about these sales. According to Business Wire, Tears of the Kingdom sold over 4 million in the Americas alone, which would make it the fastest selling Nintendo game in history for the Americas. So this is all really impressive, and it really does make me feel more comfortable in my belief that Tears of the Kingdom can pass Breath of the Wild. I've been arguing this for some time already. But leading up to release, I've seen a lot of pushback by different people, and of course, we're gonna have different opinions, have different arguments, that's totally okay. And I'm sure even after this news, some of you will still disagree that Tears of the Kingdom can pass Breath of the Wild. It should be considered that Breath of the Wild established a huge new fan base. It launched with the Nintendo Switch, and it was that big game that a lot of people were buying a Switch to play. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have the advantage of the excitement behind a new system, it's just the game alone, and maybe the reason we're seeing so much sales up front is because Breath of the Wild has a lot of die-hard fans now, and they're the ones that are going to be buying this game immediately. They already have the Switch. Breath of the Wild sales were arguably somewhat held back by people who didn't have a Switch early on, but as people bought the Switch, they also bought Breath of the Wild. This is an argument I've seen, and I do think there's likely some truth to this, but I don't think it's the ultimate indicator that Tears of the Kingdom isn't going to do as well as Breath of the Wild, and that's the only reason why the sales are so strong up front. I think the sales are so strong up front because the general excitement for Tears of the Kingdom is even greater than Breath of the Wild. And in part that is because there's already this established fan base that Breath of the Wild captured, but also because Tears of the Kingdom is reaching an even larger audience. And I believe we have some numbers to back this up. So there's another game that came out recently that actually has had comparable sales to Tears of the Kingdom. And that's Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the first true open world Pokemon games that came out this past holiday. Those games, in the first 3 days, launch weekend, just like Tears of the Kingdom recently, sold 10 million. And at the time, it was being said that it was the fastest selling Nintendo game in history. And that still may be the case. Nintendo hasn't stated that Tears of the Kingdom sold faster than any game in history, just in any game in Zelda history, and Business Wire stated the fastest selling game in the Americas. But regardless, the sales are very strong, and I think that does bode well for future sales, because while Scarlet and Violet sold 10 million in its first 3 days, it's gone on to sell 22.1 million as of March 31st. So in less than half a year, it has sold over 22 million, and it's just about 3.5 shy of the lifetime sales for Pokemon Sword and Shield, which has been out since 2019. Considering that Scarlet and Violet have yet to receive any sort of significant DLC updates, and it's just been out, I think there's a pretty darn good chance that Scarlet and Violet will pass Sword and Shield. So yes, what I'm getting at here is that the strong sales of Tears of the Kingdom, if we assume it follows a similar pattern, in about 6 months' time, maybe, will also be around 22 million. I don't think that's necessarily a stretch. But there's a couple other things to consider here. Sword and Shield has sold 25 million, not 30. So while Scarlet and Violet may catch up to Pokemon Sword and Shield, that doesn't mean it's going to be something that would pass Breath of the Wild sales. So by extension, if Tears of the Kingdom is matching up to Scarlet and Violet sales in terms of sales pace, then that doesn't necessarily mean it would catch Breath of the Wild either. But Scarlet and Violet had the advantage of coming out during the holidays. Tears of the Kingdom had the disadvantage of coming out on Mother's Day weekend. But there's another factor to consider here. Scarlet and Violet, I think in large part, sold so well because of what they are known as, open world Pokemon games, and that alone has probably pushed the sales of these games, and I did enjoy them. I thought they were good, but it's no secret that there are a number of performance issues with this game. It does feel like they rushed this to market. And so there has been a lot of that conversation. I'm sure that conversation has steered many away from Scarlet and Violet. How much, it's hard to say given how successful the game has been, but that has been the case. Tears of the Kingdom, on the other hand, the conversation is quite the opposite. The game has a 96 on Metacritic, one of the highest rated games of all time according to that site, but on OpenCritic, it is the highest rated game of all time. Point being, this game is universally appraised by critics across the board, and it's definitely in the conversation for one of the greatest games ever made. And due to the nature of the game, similar to Breath of the Wild, how there are discoveries being made left and right and people are sharing their creations and interesting interactions with the world and the creatures and the characters, it's kind of marketing itself. So while it started off hot with 10 million in 3 days, as the year draws on, it's going to pick up more and more momentum. There's going to be more and more conversation about this game, and come the holiday, it may make an even bigger push than we're anticipating here, and I can see it outpacing Scarlet and Violet, which could put into that conversation of reaching the 30 million, perhaps even within about a year. Now, Breath of the Wild is going to continue to sell, but the pace at which it's selling isn't anything super significant. Maybe it sells another million or two within the next year, but it doesn't seem like something that Tears of the Kingdom can't necessarily overcome. And there's other factors to consider here. This all can be done with the game as it is, but there hasn't been any DLC announced yet. And there is the looming next generation. Surely Nintendo's going to do something for Tears of the Kingdom for the next generation. Maybe a 4K update, maybe they pair up the DLC with it, maybe there's some sort of bundle. These are all possibilities. And also on that note, if Switch 2 does not come out this holiday, as the publication Nikkei has suggested, and also based off recent comments from Shuntaro Furukawa, Nintendo doesn't have any current plans to do a price drop this year, Nintendo may want to have some sort of bundle to push sales, and that might be bundling in Tears of the Kingdom, and that could help to push sales even further. So I do think Tears of the Kingdom has a pretty darn good chance to catch up to Breath of the Wild. But there's another wrinkle here I want to get to before we close out. So earlier I mentioned how Business Wire has shown that Tears of the Kingdom has sold over 4 million in the 3 days in just the Americas. Well, what's interesting about this is that Scarlet and Violet, in contrast, sold over 4 million in Japan in its first 3 days. From this, you may simply extrapolate, okay, Zelda appeals more to the Western market, Pokemon appeals more to the Eastern market. I think there's absolutely some truth in that. However, I also think Tears of the Kingdom is not quite the same as Breath of the Wild. I think the Ultra Hand mechanic, the crafting abilities, this is going to start to reach a larger audience. Perhaps the Minecraft audience, perhaps appealing more to people in the East, and maybe Tears of the Kingdom could reach an even larger number in Japan as more and more people talk about this game and word of mouth really pushes it. As we discussed earlier, it might start reaching even larger groups of people here. Obviously, I'm looking at things in a very optimistic way here, but these are all possibilities that could send Tears of the Kingdom in the proper direction in terms of beating Breath of the Wild sales, and I don't think any of this is necessarily a stretch. None of it's guaranteed, but I think it's all worthy of consideration, and I think a lot of these points likely will help to push sales. To what extent, we shall see, but at this point, I'm going to make a prediction confidently and say that Tears of the Kingdom will pass Breath of the Wild sales. And when I say this, I want to point out that I don't mean for this to slight the legacy of Breath of the Wild in any way, but actually to further embellish it, because Breath of the Wild established something special, and now Tears of the Kingdom is building upon that legacy reaching an even larger audience, and who knows what the future may hold for the Zelda series. 30 million may become something more standard for Zelda now, and maybe the next game that may come out 5 to 7 years from now could go to an even greater level. We shall see. But those are my thoughts on the matter. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.